This presentation is a presentation of the sheep brain observation and dissection. And you can see that I've got my nitrile gloves on. They're very good gloves. I like them a lot. Easy to work with. And I originally disinfected my area, washed my hands, put down this diaper that will retain any mess, and have all my dissecting tools at hand. There's the dissecting pin. That's not only good for tacking something down, but if you want to identify where something is, you can put that in there. And then, of course, my forceps for grabbing onto things, and then the scissors for cutting, the scalpel. I'm going to take the shield off now, keep the shield on it when it's not in use. And then a very important thing is my pointers, so that we can point to features of interest. And then what I'm going to do is bring in from over here, here's my dissecting tray with the sheep brain on it. And then one more important thing to have handy is this little Carolina instruction sheet, and we'll look at it. It's very easy to follow. It has nice big blue numbers pointing to different features of the brain, so it's quite easy to identify things. Should not be that hard. Okay, and again, let's see if we can here's the sheep brain. It's packed in Safe, which actually is a solution that's not as bad. They originally put these things in formaldehyde, which is very, very dangerous. When I was a student, we dissected stuff straight for formaldehyde. They wash as much of the formaldehyde off of this brain as they can, and then they put it in a kind of an ethylene glycol solution, which they have a particular mixture, combination of things. They call it Safe, but the name's a little bit misleading because it's not entirely safe. There is some hazard to it. Work in a well-ventilated area and try not to expose your skin to it, and don't get it in your eyes. Be wearing your safety goggles or your prescription glasses. So right now I'm going to take it out of the bag. Let's always have things a bit of difficulty getting things out of bags. Bags and tape are things that I have unpacking things, period. I don't want to damage them. There's also liquid in here, so be careful that you keep it over the tray or over the diaper so that you catch any spilled liquid. Turn this scissors over right here. Okay. Well, we're letting the brain out of the bag. Better than letting the cat out of the bag. Foresight. See, there's some liquid coming down, but there's the sheep brain. Let me put this bag here aside. Let me find a good place to put it there. That'd be a good place for it. Okay, so now we see the sheep brain. It's very important to get oriented on the direction of the sheep brain. First thing we're going to do is look through the various external aspects of the brain before we do any dissection of the brain whatsoever. Right now, this back here, this is the spinal cord going into the brain, so that's the posterior part of the brain. And then this part up here is the anterior part of the brain. Something that I just went and got is a roll of paper towels, because if your gloves get the fluid on them, you can always take a paper towel and wipe it off. So I forgot to tell you that. The outer covering around the brain is called the meninges. So if you cut into that meninges a little bit and pull it off, you know, like skinning the brain, get a hold of it as best you can, like peeling a banana. Peel that meninges off. Well, it won't go any further, so I'm gonna cut it off down here. It's really tough stuff. And what you can see then is you can see that there are elevated and depressed regions of the brain, and the elevated regions are called the gyrus, and the depressed regions, the darker regions, are called the sulcus. So let's see if we can get a little bit more of this meninges off of here. See, there's what it's like. It's a connective tissue. The outer layer is the dura mater. Remember that? We went over that in the lecture portion. I'm just going to work on it a little bit. Okay, now what I've done with the brain, the sheep brain, is to first take off all the meninges. Okay, and it was very tough. That's the connective tissue around the brain. And then I had to take a significant amount of bone and other tissue off of this anterior front end. And I just kind of worked at it little by little, cut with the scissors and the scalpel until I got that off. And then I had to take a certain amount of tissue off of the posterior end. Okay, so this came off the anterior end, this came off the posterior end. I'm putting this stuff down on the diaper so that I don't make a big mess. I can roll that up later on and just throw it all in the garbage. Okay, so now we see the sheep brain. What do we see? We see a median longitudinal fissure right there. See, it goes, this is the right cerebral hemisphere, this is the left cerebral hemisphere, then there's a median longitudinal fissure between that separates them. In a few minutes, we're going to cut right there along that median longitudinal fissure. Okay, but this is the right cerebral hemisphere, and this is the left cerebral hemisphere. This is the median longitudinal fissure. Okay, and the same lobes that the human brain has, the cerebral hemisphere has the frontal lobe, okay, and then right in this region, there's the central sulcus, see, and then behind that is the parietal lobe, and then back here is the occipital lobe, and then around on the side is the temporal lobe. See, same four lobes as you have, the frontal lobe on the front, then the central sulcus, then the parietal lobe, then the occipital lobe, then the temporal lobe on the side. Okay, and so then let's take a look right behind the occipital lobe. We find the cerebellum. Okay, and then going into the brain down here, we see the spinal cord. It runs into this part of the brain, which is called the medulla oblongata, and then on the top of the medulla oblongata is the pons. See? Spinal cord, medulla oblongata, pons. Okay. If we look, we can see some interesting things on the ventral side. I'm not going to point out everything. I'm just pointing out the main features. If you're interested in everything on it, then you can look in more detail on those sheets. But these are the olfactory tracts, the olfactory extensions from the brain. Remember, that's the first cranial nerve. And then back here you'll see these. These are the optic nerves. The optic nerves go for vision. These go for smell, cranial nerve 1, cranial nerve number 2. Okay? And so that's some of the main external features. So let's go over them before we cut the brain further. We have 2 cerebral hemispheres. Okay? The elevated portions are called gyrus, and the depressed regions are called sulcus. Separating the 2 cerebral hemispheres is the median longitudinal fissure. The median longitudinal fissure separates those 2. Fissure's like a sulcus, except it's much longer, as you can see. And then as far as the lobes of the cerebral hemispheres, we have the same ones. We have the frontal lobe, then the central sulcus, then the parietal lobe, then the occipital lobe in the back, and then the temporal lobe along the side. Also, we have what's this behind the occipital lobe? That's the cerebellum. Okay, here's the spinal cord coming in. The spinal cord goes into the medulla oblongata, and above it is the pons. And then we can see the olfactory tracts, see, for smell. And then we can see the optic nerves right here. Where they cross is called the optic chiasma. Okay. So now that we've looked at the external features of the sheep brain, let's go ahead and make what's called a median sagittal section, and we'll do that with our scalpel. And basically what that means is we're going to separate the right cerebral hemisphere from the left cerebral hemisphere. So be careful with the scalpel, don't cut towards yourself. And we're just going to cut right into that. It cuts easily. But that meninges is tough to get off. The meninges is tough to get off. Okay, but separating the two cerebral hemispheres, it's kind of almost mushy. It goes right through it. Now it's going to get a little bit harder when you go back here through the cerebellum. Okay, but not too much harder. It's more solid. That fissure is mostly like cutting into space. Okay, so you can see it coming apart here. And we'll even slice down the spinal cord. Okay. Okay, so now we have it separated. You can see that's the right side of the brain right there. And this is the left side of the brain back here. See, isn't that pretty? Okay, so let's take a look now at the right cerebral hemisphere, what we can see. Okay. Again, that's the spinal cord coming in back there. It goes to the medulla oblongata. In front of that is the pons. This is the cerebellum. If you see, you can see branches in here that look like a tree. That's been named arbor vitae. Okay, up here you can see the temporal lobe on the side. Then this big white area right here, okay, this big white area here is called the corpus callosum. It is a white commissure, white matter, between the right and left cerebral hemispheres so they can communicate with each other. Okay, and just below that is the thalamus, then the hypothalamus, then the pituitary would be right down here, but we don't get everything on every thing. Some things get cut off. Okay, you can see the olfactory tract up there, and where the optic nerve was back there. Okay, so that's called a sagittal section, mid-sagittal section going through the middle of the brain, separating the right from left. Let's take a look at the other one just for comparison. See, here's your olfactory bulb. Here's your frontal lobe, temporal lobe on the side, corpus callosum, below that the thalamus, then the hypothalamus, the pituitary would be down there. Here's the spinal cord coming in. Okay, it comes into the medulla oblongata. There's the cerebellum above it, which has got the arbor vitae in it, the tree of life. Okay, and so that's basically what you see in the median sagittal section. Okay, then the final part of the dissection is to do a coronal or frontal section. We're not going to see a lot more anatomy that way, but we'll see how the white matter and the gray matter is obtained. So you just take the brain, and what you're doing when you do this right through the middle part of the cerebral hemisphere, you're separating the anterior from the posterior. Remember, that's either called a coronal or a frontal section. So let's just pick a spot right here to go through with the scalpel. Then we can look at that right there. And what you can see, the one thing you want to see there is that you're separating the, not that you're separating, that the matter on the outside is gray matter and the matter on the inside is lighter, it's white matter. Remember the difference between those? The gray matter is the unmyelinated axons. Conduction velocity is slow, and the white matter is myelinated axons, and the conduction velocity is fast. So that is the dissection of the sheep brain. I hope that you learn a little bit about the anatomy of the sheep brain. You can learn a lot of anatomy by dissection. I've had the opportunity to work some with cadavers, and that's the most interesting of all. But any kind of a dissection, I think, from my point of view, is beneficial to learning anatomy, and I also think it's a lot of fun. So I hope you appreciate the sheep brain and what you can learn about the anatomy of the brain from doing it.